Welcome back, drama lovers. If you miss Kelders van Geheime, don't stress, I've got you. What's about to unfold is not just a recap. It's a gripping retelling that drops you right into the heat of Sobat's Kloof. So grab your coffee, turn the volume up, and let those ads roll for at least 30 seconds to help us keep this channel running strong. You can also support us with a super thanks or by joining the channel membership. Every bit helps keep the drama alive. Now let's dive into the explosive final stretch of Season 1. On the sun-drenched morning of Thursday, the 1st of May 2025, Kelders van Geheime returned with episode 259, and it didn't take long before emotional boundaries were shattered and hard truths clawed their way to the surface. Annette, still raw from the emotional shrapnel of recent weeks, delivered her most decisive move yet. She rejected Octavia's strained offer to play mother. Not gently, not hesitantly. With a look that carried years of abandonment and manipulation, she made it known. She had no interest in allowing Octavia back into her life, especially not under a sanitized version of maternal concern. Octavia, usually composed, struggled to mask her humiliation. But beneath that sharp disappointment was something darker, the kind of bitterness that brews into retaliation. Meanwhile, things weren't any calmer elsewhere. In episode 259, Pivotal Confrontation, Unati and Atandwa reached their boiling point. For weeks, their disagreements simmered behind veiled glances and clipped conversations. But on this Thursday in May, it all exploded. Atandwa accused Unati of dishonoring their family's traditions, of turning her back on who she was meant to be. Unati, on the other hand, had finally had enough of walking a line drawn by others. Voices were raised. Tears were swallowed. And when Atandwa stormed off, it was clear that the bridge between them might have been permanently burned. But the most soul-piercing moment of episode 259 belonged to Nenna. That evening, with the low hum of silence pressing against the walls of Joey's modest kitchen, she stared him down and demanded the truth. No more half-stories, no more emotional gymnastics. Joey, worn down by guilt, finally broke. Nenna pushed and pushed. Silently, something inside him gave way. Secrets long buried, including Marcel's fate, Charles S&R brother, buried in the orchard to protect the farm, and the real story behind Allison's vanishing, her mind fraying, her memories slipping like sand, began to unspool. The weight of that confession hung thick in the room, and, for Nenna, every word cracked open a new betrayal. The curtain fell on Season 1 of Kelders van Geheime with episode 260 on Friday the 2nd of May 2025, and it was the kind of finale that didn't ask permission to rip the heart out of its audience. Nenna, having dragged buried truths from Joey's mouth the night before, refused to let him retreat into silence again. This time she demanded it all, the whole truth. Who was really responsible for Allison's disappearance? Her mind now a labyrinth, her presence reduced to whispers. Why had Marcel's name vanished from conversations for so long? With every sentence, Joey chipped away at a wall of deceit that had stood for years. He confessed enough to leave Nenna shattered but craving more truth, more answers, more justice. But there was no time for fallout. Over at the hospital, the Murray and sister families stood on edge, bound together by anguish. They gathered in hushed clusters, waiting for any update on Charlie's fragile condition. Annette clung to Edmund's arm, her usual resolve hollowed out by fear. Across from them, Veronique, for once without a sharp word, sat beside Shireen. Even she couldn't muster the usual Murray pride, not in the face of this looming loss. Meanwhile, Steele Piet stood restless. The tensions between his nephews had spiraled from bruised egos to emotional warfare, and now, with Charlie in critical condition, he questioned whether their rivalry had gone too far. His guilt simmered beneath the surface, unspoken but undeniable. And as for Junior, he was nowhere to be found, wordlessly drowning in guilt over Allison's absence, her fate a shadow he couldn't outrun. He roamed the edges of the property like a man without a country. Outside the sterile glow of the hospital's waiting room, time moved sluggishly. Inside, every second stretched like an eternity. The doctor emerged, his face a grim canvas. Charlie was gone. Annette's scream tore through the silence while Edmund collapsed into a chair, his vow to his son unspoken but deafening. "I'll make them pay." The screen faded out, not with resolution, but with the weight of the unknown. Junior clutching Allison's scarf in the vineyard, her name on his lips like a requiem. And just like that, season 1 came to a close, not with answers, but with silence, pain, and the sense that much worse was still ahead. Season 2 of Kelders van Geheime opened on Monday the 5th of May 2025 with episode 1, and the tone was clear from the first breath. The wounds from season 1 weren't going to heal quietly. The sun rose over Sabbatskloof, but it brought no comfort. Charlie had passed, and the ripple effect of that tragedy was beginning to show its teeth. Sabbatskloof was a town in mourning, but the silence wasn't peaceful, it was charged. Edmund stood frozen in front of the old barn where he and Charlie used to talk about the future. That future was now gone. He hadn't spoken more than a few words since the doctors confirmed what they all feared. He didn't cry, he didn't rage, he just stared, blank and broken. Annette stayed mostly in the bedroom, curled on the edge of the bed where Charlie used to nap during their visits. She hadn't eaten in over a day, and she barely responded when Edmund tried to coax her out. The weight of her grief was paralyzing. Over at the sister house, Nena lit a candle and didn't speak for hours. Shireen held on to her cup of tea like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Veronique, for once, wasn't the dominant voice in the room. Even she seemed adrift, unsettled by how final death could be, and how quickly it had come. But the most unexpected silence came from Junior. He walked the edges of the vineyard, staring into the rows of vines as if they held answers. The guilt of Allison's disappearance was gnawing through him. He'd buried that truth, convinced himself he could live with it, but now, with Charlie gone and a funeral looming, his conscience was cracking, and no one knew how close he was to shattering. As night fell on episode 1 of this new season, one thing was clear: this wasn't a fresh start, this was fallout, and every character was scrambling to breathe under the weight of grief, guilt, and unspoken truths. Keep this storytelling alive by supporting the channel. Let the ad play a bit longer, drop a super thanks, or consider becoming a member so we can walk with these characters every step of the way through this emotional storm. On Tuesday, the 6th of May 2025, Episode 2 arrived like a continuation of the long funeral march Sabbatskloof had found itself trapped in. The grief from Charlie's death didn't fade. It deepened, spreading into every conversation, every shared glance, every unspoken word. Edmund barely moved from the porch that morning. He watched the workers tend to the vines, but his eyes weren't really following anything. When Shireen tried to approach him, he turned away. The only person he wanted to see was gone, and he wasn't ready to open that wound to anyone else, not yet. Annette, meanwhile, snapped out of her silence, only to scream. A pillow thrown against the wall, a photo frame shattered. It was the first sound she'd made in nearly 2 days, and it said everything that words couldn't. At the sister home, the quiet was replaced by anxious whispers. Nena asked questions no one could answer. Why now? Why him? Why did the young die while others, like Veronique or Joey, whose sins stretched decades, walked around untouched? The bitterness beneath her sadness was sharp. Veronique, feeling that sting, didn't respond. She simply packed away Charlie's belongings in a box labeled for later and left it by the door. Junior was still missing from the usual gathering spots. Wordlessly, he'd left town the night before and returned just before dawn. Nobody knew where he went, but when he came back, his eyes looked older, darker. In episode 2, he made a decision. He couldn't keep lying about Allison. But how do you confess something when you're not even sure where the line between guilt and responsibility lies? Outside, Sabbatskloof continued to look beautiful. Golden skies, rustling vines, soft winds. But inside every home, inside every character, was a brewing storm. Charlie's death wasn't just a personal tragedy. It was a tipping point, and Tuesday's episode made it painfully clear things would never return to how they were. On the somber winter afternoon of Wednesday the 7th of May 2025, Kelders van Geheime brought us episode 3, A chapter soaked in grief, regret, and a faint glimmer of resilience. Death had settled over Sobotskluth like a fog that refused to lift. The news of Hermion's passing rocked the Murray family to its core, her absence a cavernous silence that none could fill. Junior, who had only just begun to grasp the cost of returning home, lost Alison in a devastating blow that left him suspended in sorrow. Their final exchange, laced with hesitation and tenderness, now echoed in his mind like a cruel reminder of unfinished business. For Annette and Edmund, the pain was more than personal, it was foundational. Losing Charlie had stolen the breath from their lungs. The child they had dreamt about, prepared for, and clung to during long, uncertain nights was gone. But it was not just the loss that gutted them, it was the hope that had come before it. And yet, amidst this darkness, a small light flickered. There was talk, cautious and quiet, of what might be possible in the future. Could something meaningful rise from the ashes of this devastation? The entire community felt the weight of it. From the workers in the cellar to the elders at the local cafe, conversations fell short, as if no one wanted to say the wrong thing. Sobotskluth wasn't just mourning individuals, it was mourning the illusion of certainty. Episode 3 was a painful reminder that love and loss often arrive in the same breath. By Thursday, the 8th of May 2025, Kelders van Geheime reached episode 4, and with it came a brutal decision that would leave lasting scars. Edmund stood at a precipice no parent should ever face. With the hospital lights flickering above him and monitors beeping in cold rhythm, he had to make the call about Charlie's fate. The doctors had done all they could. What remained was up to Edmund, and the crushing weight of that responsibility bore down on his chest like a vice. Through tears and clenched fists, he made the choice. Not for himself, not even for Annette, but for Charlie, whose brief life deserved dignity. Back at the Murray's estate, Junior found himself ensnared in a lie that had long since outgrown its purpose. Alison's absence could no longer be explained away by convenient excuses. Friends were asking questions, her family wanted answers, but Junior, still reeling from his own grief, simply couldn't bring himself to reveal the truth, so he lied, again. And the lie, like poison, continued to spread. This episode also cast a quiet shadow over the sister family as they began to realize that Edmund's devastation would have ripple effects across Sobotskluth. Shireen, once steady and strong, appeared distracted, overwhelmed by her own sorrow. Still Piet, sensing the collapse of emotional order, tried to bring people together. But unity, it seemed, was the first casualty of loss. On Friday the 9th of May 2025, Episode 5 of Kelders van Geheime took the grief of Sobotskluth and turned it into a quiet, aching farewell. The Murray and sister families stood side by side, gathered beneath grey skies to say goodbye to Charlie. The service was simple, intimate, and laced with unbearable stillness. Annette clung to Edmund's arm, her face unreadable, her spirit suspended between presence and absence. Edmund, outwardly composed, was drowning inside, the weight of the final goodbye nearly breaking him. There were no speeches that could ease the pain, no hymns that could carry it away. Just silence, flowers, and unanswered prayers. But grief, as always, brought friction. When the topic of organ donation surfaced, the room shifted. Tension ignited between family members. Some saw it as an act of hope, others as an unthinkable surrender. Edmund was at the center of it all, pulled between moral duty and raw parental instinct. The decision had been made, but its consequences were only just beginning to surface. By the end of the episode, grief had not united the families. It had fractured them further, with quiet looks and barely concealed accusations proving that even in death, the battle for control and peace would continue. When Monday, the 12th of May 2025 arrived, so did episode 6, and with it, a bittersweet blend of memory and struggle. Edmund found himself wandering the farm, haunted by the echo of Charlie's laughter in places that now seemed hollow. The vineyard, the porch, even the quiet rustle of the wind in the trees, all of it became unbearable reminders of a life cut short. He tried to focus on work, on people, on anything, but his mind kept returning to Charlie's final breath. Across town, Shireen was unraveling. Strong on the outside, she was privately shattered. Her grief, unlike Edmund's, had nowhere to go. Every attempt to offer comfort was met with polite dismissal and eventually silence. Meanwhile, still Piet received a knock on the door that would change the course of his day. Forced to vacate their home due to unexpected land issues, he and his nephews faced an immediate crisis. With nowhere to turn, it was Napoleon, unexpectedly and generously, who stepped in. Offering them shelter wasn't just a gesture of kindness, it was a reminder that in Sobatsklouf, alliances were often formed not in joy, but in shared hardship. Unati stood beneath the low morning mist of Sobatsklouf on Tuesday the 13th of May 2025, knowing full well that time had run out for silence. Episode 7 opened with her knocking on Atanwa's door, determined to repair what their grief had torn apart. But the warmth she hoped for was long gone. Atanwa's eyes were cold, his words clipped, and when she reached for his hand, he stepped back. What followed was not a fight, but a quiet acceptance that something precious had been lost between them. Meanwhile, at the Murray home, preparations for Charlie's funeral took an ugly turn. The sister family and the Murrayses found themselves clashing over the most basic arrangements, songs, flowers, even who would speak. Every decision turned into a point of contention, each one dragging the funeral further from being a shared act of love into a battlefield of ego and grief. In the middle of it all, Edmund, still emotionally numb, stepped away from the noise and called for a private meeting with Shireen. Their conversation, brief and loaded with subtext, hinted that something more was brewing under the surface. Whether it was guilt, fear, or something else entirely, only they knew. But by the time Edmund left the room, a sense of secrecy had crept back into the air of Sobatsklouf. By Wednesday, the 14th of May 2025, Episode 8 reminded Sobatsklouf what happens when grief is weaponized. With Charlie's funeral looming, the sisters and the Murrayses finally made an effort to put their differences aside, at least publicly. The arrangements resumed, decisions were made, and from the outside, everything appeared to be falling into place. But within the walls of the Murray home, Edmund was anything but stable. He refused meals, lashed out at family members, and disappeared for long stretches without explanation. Shireen tried to check in, but each attempt was met with defensiveness or silence. It wasn't until Veronique returned to the farm and received an unexpected visitor from her past that the episode shifted gears. The face at her door was older, worn, but unmistakable. A man who hadn't been seen since long before the accident that changed everything. Their exchange was brief, but it rattled Veronique so deeply that she poured herself a drink the moment he left. The past, it seemed, was not finished with her yet, and Sobatsklouf, already suffocating under layers of tragedy, had yet to see its worst. Thursday, the 15th of May 2025, brought Episode 9, and with it, the slow unraveling of Edmund Murray. His grief, once masked by distracted busyness, now had no place to hide. In the early hours of the morning, he was found sitting on the kitchen floor, a bottle in one hand and a broken photo frame in the other. He hadn't slept. He hadn't spoken to anyone since the previous afternoon. As the day wore on, Edmund began to spiral, pushing away those trying to help and seeking comfort in the company of women who only saw his vulnerability as opportunity. By sunset, he had driven out of Sobatsklouf entirely, returning in the company of someone no one had ever seen before, reeking of alcohol and desperation. The rest of the family, already stretched thin, didn't know how to handle him anymore. Meanwhile, Unati, who had vanished for days without a word, finally returned. Her reappearance was not met with celebration. Still, Piet had been holding the household together in her absence and now demanded answers. Their confrontation was fiery, years of family tension boiling to the surface in a few minutes of brutal honesty. But if Unati returned hoping for a warm welcome, she left the room knowing that forgiveness in this family was a long game. On Friday, the 16th of May 2025, Episode 10 took the emotional wreckage of the past week and scattered it even further. Edmund was no longer just grieving. He was unraveling completely. His outbursts grew more unpredictable, lashing out at family and staff alike. Debbie Lee, always trying to steady the chaos, attempted to talk sense into him, but he accused her of betrayal, sending her away in a storm of bitter words. Back at the sister house, Atandwa found himself caught between a sense of duty and the impossibility of the choice ahead. His heart was with Sobat Skloof, but expectations from beyond the farm demanded something else entirely. When he confided in Unati, the exchange turned tense. She had made her position clear, and watching him waver again tested the fragile trust they had begun rebuilding. Meanwhile, Veronique, whose grip on control had always been tight, was now under fire. Marco confronted her, not with accusations, but with questions sharp enough to sting. He wanted to know why she continued to diminish Still Pyatt, and why her version of loyalty always seemed to come with strings attached. She didn't answer. Instead, she simply walked away, her silence louder than any explanation. And, just like that, the line between truth and survival grew even thinner. Monday, the 19th of May 2025, brought with it episode 11, a day drenched in grief as Sobat Skloof gathered to lay Charlie to rest. The funeral was held beneath a heavy grey sky that seemed to echo the weight pressing down on every heart present. From the moment the coffin was lowered, silence consumed the gathering like a second death. Edmund stood rigid beside Shireen, unmoving as if the reality hadn't sunk in until that moment. Annette, face pale and drawn, kept her gaze fixed forward, refusing to let anyone see the tears pooling in her eyes. Family members and farm workers stood shoulder to shoulder, but the tension between them made it feel like two separate camps gathered for the same loss. As the ceremony ended, conversations were brief and cautious. Words failed even those who usually spoke too much. What had once been a united family was now fragmented, standing together only in form, not in feeling. And when the mourners departed, Edmund stayed behind, alone with the grave, whispering something no one else would hear. Not a prayer, not a goodbye, but a vow. What he promised there, only the soil knows. Tuesday, the 20th of May 2025, marked episode 12, where silence began to settle in places where there had once been sound. The loss of Charlie had pressed down on everyone, but for Alison, the weight became unbearable. Without warning, she packed a bag and left Sobat Skloof behind, telling no one except Junior. She needed air, distance and clarity, but her absence left more than just an empty room. It left questions no one was ready to answer. Junior kept quiet, avoiding everyone, especially Veronique, who was beginning to notice the quiet unraveling in her son. Meanwhile, Still Pyatt made a decision of his own. Having fought hard to bridge the gap with his nephews, he realized the cost of conflict was no longer worth it. Without ceremony, he stepped back, offering no explanation, no apology, just space. And in that space, the fractures became more visible. Veronique, ever the quiet observer, began to dig deeper into her connection with the Solomon family. Something about their past, something left unsaid, was pulling her closer. Whether it was a hunch, guilt, or a secret not yet revealed, her interest was more than passing curiosity. It was personal. And Sobat Skloof, already trembling under the weight of grief, now braced for something else entirely. On the chilly morning of Wednesday, the 21st of May 2025, episode 13 opened with a heavy silence hanging over Sobat Skloof. Whispers about Edmund's unraveling state of mind had started to spiral out of control. Once known for his calculated restraint, Edmund now staggered through each day like a man haunted by phantoms, barely coherent, emotionally volatile, and no longer capable of hiding it. His family watched him slip deeper into the shadows of his grief, with Debbie Lee keeping a quiet vigil, refusing to leave his side even as others began pulling back. But the real tremor struck at the heart of the Solomons when Shireen dropped a confession so seismic it seemed to suspend the air in the room. Her revelation splintered her family's unity, a betrayal of trust wrapped in tears, and a future she had planned without them. Her father sat in stunned silence while her mother's voice cracked with disbelief, and Joey, usually the calm in the storm, could only stare, unable to contain the shock. Elsewhere, Kobani gathered his sons with the quiet intensity of a man with little time to fix what was broken. With decades of feuds weighing heavily on him, he pleaded with them to lay down their weapons, emotional or otherwise, and choose unity. But peace in Berg Valley was a fragile hope. Deep-seated rivalries between neighbors and old wounds left to fester were boiling just beneath the surface. Tensions soared as people eyed one another with suspicion, and it became clear that something was brewing, something Sabbatskloof might not be ready to handle. The winds shifted by Thursday the 22nd of May 2025, and episode 14 delivered one of the most jarring moments of the month. It all started with terrified screams echoing through Dijart. Brenda, clutching her chest, ran from the scene as if she'd seen a ghost, while Gershwin stood frozen, pale, sweating, trembling, unable to explain what exactly had occurred. Whatever happened, it was enough to send shivers down the spines of everyone who heard the story secondhand. The place, already marred by secrecy and unrest, had become a new epicenter of dread. Meanwhile, Sandy's world shifted on its axis. Shireen's future plans, which included a life far from the farm and even further from her mother, cut deep. Sandy tried to keep her cool, but when her voice cracked in front of Nenna, the depth of the wound was clear. Shireen wasn't just planning a move, she was planning a break, and Sandy wasn't ready to be left behind. In the background, Debbie Lee's role evolved from quiet supporter to Edmund's emotional anchor. While others avoided him, she pulled him closer, offering gentle words and firm guidance. Her loyalty was starting to cost her. She covered for his erratic behavior, intercepted family meetings meant to confront him, and even went as far as stalling medical interventions. She knew he was spiraling, but she also knew she was the only one left who could stop him from hitting the bottom. And if these emotionally charged episodes have you on the edge of your seat, do your part to keep them coming. Become a channel member, tap super thanks, and let those ads play through. As the sun dipped behind the mountain range on Friday the 23rd of May 2025, episode 15 wrapped Sabbatskloof in a deceptive quiet, one that barely concealed the fractures tearing through its families. Edmund was a shell of his former self, his spiraling condition now undeniable. Conversations behind closed doors turned into hushed arguments about how best to handle him. But it was Debbie Lee who acted. She covered for him at a community meeting, made excuses for his absence at a memorial, and even went as far as intercepting medication he was meant to take, fearing it might make things worse. Meanwhile, hope flickered elsewhere. When word spread that Still Piet had been accepted to initiation school, the family beamed with pride, but not Unati. His reaction was not just about disapproval, it was personal. Still Piet's decision reeked of rejection, and Unati felt as though the traditions he had tried to pass down were being discarded. His face, though stoic, revealed a father nursing a bruised spirit. The episode closed with a harrowing contrast, one man stepping toward adulthood with clarity, another losing his grip on sanity with every passing hour. By the time dawn broke on Monday the 26th of May 2025, episode 16 had already begun setting the stage for both ceremony and chaos. The mood in the Solomon household was one of bittersweet pride as Atandwa and Still Piet, dressed in traditional regalia, preparing to leave for initiation school. Their families tried to smile, to celebrate, but eyes betrayed deeper worries. Was the world outside their fences ready for them? Were they ready to come back changed? As farewells were exchanged, another drama was quietly unfolding. Joyce, rifling through old pension documents, stumbled upon a horrifying truth. Ivan's pension had been drained. Not misplaced, not delayed, stolen. Her face darkened with fury and helplessness. She stormed from the room, fists clenched and teeth gritted, and declared war on whoever thought they could rob her husband in his final years. But amidst it all, Edmund's volatility reached a new peak. During a community prayer, he stood suddenly, eyes glazed, mouth half open, ready to lash out. It was Debbie Lee who stepped in, not gently this time, but with stern command, dragging him out before he could publicly humiliate himself. What nobody saw was the way her hands shook after her strength was running out. Tuesday, the 27th of May 2025, arrived with the smell of smoke and danger in the air, metaphorical and otherwise. Episode 17 opened with Kobani and Napoleon seated in the back of an old pickup, discussing something so serious neither man dared raise his voice. Kobani had a proposal, something bold, illegal, and potentially profitable. A new business venture that involved bootlegging Whitblitz under the radar. Napoleon, veteran of failed schemes and close shaves, warned him of the risks, but Kobani was tired of caution. He wanted legacy. Meanwhile, back at the Murray household, Edmund's family staged an intervention. A few close relatives gathered, hoping to appeal to what little of Edmund remained. But the plan collapsed before it began. Edmund walked in, heard one sentence and exploded. He called them vultures, accused them of betrayal, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it echoed across the estate. Later, Gershwin faced his own hell, a dilemma that required him to either protect a secret or do the right thing, a secret that could shatter lives. But morality came with a price, and he wasn't sure he could afford it. By Wednesday, the 28th of May 2025, episode 18 had tensions at a boil. Napoleon couldn't shake the feeling that Kobani was being manipulated. The way Thazama smiled too sweetly, stayed too close, asked too many questions, it didn't sit right. He warned Kobani that love can be used like poison, slow and sweet, but Kobani wouldn't hear it. He was too far gone, seeing Thazama not for who she was, but for who he desperately wanted her to be. At the Murray household, Debbie Lee, pushed to the edge, enacted a new strategy with Edmund. Gone were the soft reassurances. She began locking up his keys, limiting access to the cellar and forcing him to face his reflection in the mirror. He raged, called her name, slammed doors, but deep down something cracked. It was working. Meanwhile, Alistair's slow infiltration of the Solomon Circle reached a disturbing climax. He began advising, manipulating, even offering financial help. His charm was only skin deep, but somehow nobody noticed, except Gershwin, whose sleepless nights were now filled with dread. Thursday, the 29th of May, 2025, episode 19, brought quiet revelations with loud consequences. Debbie Lee was now moving like a shadow in Edmund's life, attending his meetings for him, delivering notes to his lawyer, even lying to his family on his behalf. Nobody knew just how deep she was in, or how dangerous her loyalty had become. Kobani, oblivious to the warnings piling up, threw himself headfirst into Thazama's arms, certain this was love, convinced she would stand beside him through anything. But others saw it for what it was, obsession. Gershwin was no longer just wary of Alistair, he was paralyzed by him. Alistair had information, leverage and control, and when Gershwin tried to resist, he found himself trapped in a situation where every move could destroy someone he loved. As the episode neared its end, an unexpected figure arrived on the fringes of Sabbat Skloof, a long-forgotten presence who had once caused havoc, and who would do it again. The question was no longer if something terrible would happen, but when. On the final Friday of May, the 30th of 2025, episode 20 pulled the curtain back on just how close Sabbat Skloof was to complete collapse. Edmund, barely eating, barely sleeping, found solace in a place no one expected, a rival turned friend who saw past the madness to the broken man underneath. The conversation left him vulnerable, and more dependent than ever on Debbie Lee. Their dynamic shifted again. What had started as loyalty was now emotional entrapment. Kobani, in love and increasingly reckless, made a decision that would sever him from his sons. He chose Thazama over blood, and the fallout was immediate. Alistair, more emboldened than ever, backed Gershwin into a psychological corner. With blackmail hanging over his head, Gershwin couldn't speak, couldn't act, couldn't even breathe without wondering when the axe would fall. Sabbat Skloof was no longer just a wine farm, it was a pressure cooker, and all it would take was one spark to blow it all to pieces. And that's the month that shook Kelders van Geheime to its core. From shocking confessions to emotional collapses, Sabbat Skloof is a place where truth is buried deep, and everyone has dirt under their fingernails. If you felt that intensity, if the story gripped you like it gripped us, do your part to keep the drama alive. Hit that super thanks, join the channel membership, and let those ads roll. Until next time, stay curious, stay loyal, and never turn your back on a secret in the cellar.